Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. You are about to hear a debate about racism, the George Floyd protests, police brutality, libertarianism, anarchism, the oppression of the state, and despite its lack of recent attention, the continuing threat of COVID-19. Here we go.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
I'm a dead man the most when it comes to selling gimmicks, but a lie speaker don't know who the fuck is gonna mimic this real life experience. We struggle every day.
All right, today we are joined with David Johnson. He just wrote a book, Surviving Corona. David, so happy to have you, man.
Great to be here.
I had a good time on your show. That was you and I beat up Dale relentlessly.
Yeah.
We just tag teamed.
That was a fun show. There were some laugh out loud moments. Guys, if you haven't heard it, look up Skeptics and Seekers. Hit the section. I can't remember what I called it, archive or something like that. Look for Robert Stanley.
Skeptics and Seekers, is it .com?
Skeptics and Seekers
.squarespace.com. Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Used to be a WordPress site, but I have to upgrade it to Squarespace, and so
and people can find
a lot of good features there.
They can find your book there.
Yes, they can find it if you go to skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com /surviving-corona, or just go to the main page, and then at the very top you'll see some tabs. Just click on the first one. It says Surviving Corona, and then follow the instructions, which generally involve buying the book and leaving a generous donation.
Awesome.
We'll talk about that some.
Yeah, I want to hear about it. We're also joined with Tread on Me, the host of Tread on Me. That's a libertarian anarchist podcast, something like that. I think you guys might want to describe it somewhat differently, but that's Jacob Thompson, Sam Lunt. So happy to have you guys.
Thanks. It's great to be on. Look forward to a good conversation.
Thank you.
This is something that you can find on SoundCloud. Tread on Me. What's that all about, guys?
So we kind of started, we're about actually a little over a year right now. We just, we have different political views that obviously don't fit into the mainstream. We fall into like libertarianism or anarchy and things like that. And we really didn't have a way to talk to, we either have people on the far right or far left in our lives. And we had a little bit of ideas that lined up with each of those platforms of political ideologies. But no one really, no one really accept like our thoughts and let's hear us out. So we just ranted to each other a lot. And one day we just said, let's record this stuff and put it online and see if anybody wants to listen. And people have come and listened. So that's kind of how it got started. Jake can add to that story if you haven't missed anything.
I would have loved your story if you'd have been like, we put it out there, so you wanted to listen, and nobody did. It was really it
was hard at first, I'll admit that. But then we started, creating spicy memes, so that attracted the audience.
That's what does it. Lots of boogaloo stuff.
Yeah.
I was at this protest just last night. Not a riot, just a peaceful protest, and there were those boogaloo dudes everywhere. I didn't think it was like a real thing. I thought it was just like an internet thing. But there was like tons of people in camo, Hawaiian shirts, or just like goofy shirts all in general, Mm-hmm. And it was a little spooky. I'll be honest.
Those boogaloo boys. I think Sam also will agree with me when he say we're not. I would never consider myself a part of that in any way. I'm a part of some of those circles. But I think that the Boogaloo Boys are essentially what Antifa is to communists. I think that they're brash and they're chaotic, and they are going to cause more problems than actually solving any. I don't know if you even saw that. A few of them actually got caught trying to instigate riots, I think last week. So I think Sam and I actually try to distance ourselves from the Boogaloo Boys and the Boogaloo movement in its entirety, because at the end of the day, I believe fundamentally that all the revolutions in history, there are very few successful revolutions, and the ones that are successful kind of turn on their original intent, and it's always a violent power struggle. And the Boogaloo Boys are nothing different than, like, I guess, the Bolsheviks, in my opinion.
David, you're black. That's a good segue.
Yeah. I got to tell you, when I woke up this morning and looked in the mirror, shocked. Yeah, it's true though.
That was smooth. But no, I wanted to ask you a question. So I'm walking around. I go to one of these Boogaloo guys, and he's a black guy, and apparently they're not all white. And I ask him, like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, we don't need you here. Like, what are you here for? And he's like, oh, just to make sure everything, one of those kind of keeping the peace, fella. Making sure everybody is on their toes. Or, well, I don't know, whatever. Just some random cliche bullshit. And then, and I'm like, yeah, but like, I thought you guys, like, everything I see of you guys on the internet, it's all like watching out for the cops. Like, let's kick the government's ass or something. But like, you guys are like standing around the crowd. You're not standing around the cops. If anything, you're over there doing like cool little hand gestures with the cops and kid and play kind of stuff with the feet. And it seems like you're here to make sure the black people don't get uppity. And he got pissed. And he's like, dude, I'm black. And like, he just walks off. Is it possible for that to be, for him to be accurate and me to be wrong here? Because maybe, I don't know, maybe it has nothing to do with color.
Well, okay, so let me just say, I know so little about the Boogaloo movement that it would be ridiculous for me to try to say anything about the group and their motives and so forth. I just know what I can Google, and that it doesn't look like he's speaking accurately. But I can speak to maybe your encounter with a black man in one of these groups, because there was a time when I would have been a black man in one of these groups. So I could have very easily identified with this group. I used to be a Rush Limbaugh conservative, talk radio junkie. I had an espresso bar once upon a time, and I listened to AM talk radio all day. So I'd get there, leave at like 4 a.m. and leave at like 6 p.m. And so that whole time was just conservative talk radio. So I do understand the black conservative and how they can kind of get mixed up in these sorts of things, thinking that they're on the side of the angels, thinking that they're doing something positive for America as a whole, feeling very patriotic and not understanding the other side of the black issues very well. I mean, after all, it's a history that is not taught in school almost at all. But when it is, it's very superficial. And so it's very difficult to understand the deep pain of the black people in this country without having some fairly deep knowledge of history. And most people, including blacks, just don't have it.
All right, quick pop quiz. Jacob, Sam, name 3 black inventors. Go.
George Carver.
That's actually pretty good.
Hell, I can't do that.
That was he invented the peanut. What did he do? He did peanut butter, right?
Yeah, he invented a ton of uses for the peanut.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's all I know. That's the only. This is gonna sound racist, but didn't a black guy invent the cotton gin? I want to say.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily racist. It's just I'm sure there's a racist joke in there somewhere, but
right. So once you start Googling, of course, the question gets a lot easier to answer. But this just kind of points to it just kind of points to the fact that this is not a history that's very well taught in school. And in all fairness, I think that a lot of people would stumble if you ask them to name 3 white inventors. So that's it's a good soundbite. I don't know that it really makes the point, though.
I can't think of one. I got nothing. Put me on the spot.
I'm kind of interested. I think David touched on a point I want to kind of have him expand on. He said he was a Rush Limbaugh, black conservative, conservative radio, might join a Boogaloo group at some point. And I'm kind of curious, like, with the transition there, like because it sounds like you don't associate with that anymore. So what was the transition, the point that got you devolved where you are, and what's your current thinking, just so I get a better foundation on where this conversation's headed?
Well, I studied history. I began to study black history. So one of the last things, I shouldn't say it's one of the last things, one of the last great things that I did during my time as a Christian. So just so your audience knows, I'm an atheist. In fact, you might say I'm an atheist activist, but I was a Christian for mostly the first 40 years of my life. And there was a time in the late 90s when I did a ministry. I embarked on a racial reconciliation ministry called One Faith Ministries. And to do that, I had to become very familiar with Black history. My focus was racism in the church, but you can't focus on that without delving fairly deeply into Black history in general. And so I think it was during my time there that I had a new awakening, I guess you could say, and a eye-opening and a new greater perspective on what was going on in my world. And I simply could not hold to the views that I once had once I had a broader perspective.
Gotcha. So I guess to example, what if you could sum it up, what kind of your current views now on it then?
Well,
like what's your worldview, I guess you could sum it up right now, just so I can kind of see the evolution of you and where you kind of fell in the chips.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to sum it up. I think that there is a deep, abiding pain of Black people in America that reaches back to systemic racism, and the systemic racism in our country is not an event. It is an ongoing, continual thing. It is baked into some of the very foundations of our core systems. And it's not the past either. The past is something that we can say happened and then it had an end, and then we can look back on its beginning and end from some point in the future. But this is not the past. It's not the past if you were abused yesterday and your abuser is still abusing you today. You wouldn't call yesterday's abuse the past. It's part of the same thing. And I would suggest that the institutional systematic racism never ended. It's not the past. And so those are a couple of broad ways to look at where I am today.
It's a nice way to sum it up.
I had a similar path as you did, going from religious right, big Rush Limbaugh kind of Hannity, and who was the one guy that kept sexually harassing his employee?
I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty broad question.
Who's that one guy?
Who didn't?
Is that guy? Is his name Bill?
Yeah, Bill O'Reilly. I should have been like, let me narrow it down. He's a right-wing guy that sexually harassed a woman. Like, I have no idea. Oh, what was it? Yeah, he calls her up drunk, and apparently this happened a lot, and he left she started recording his voicemails, or saving his voicemails, and one of them, he was so drunk he couldn't think of the word loofah, and he was trying to say something like, I want to watch you shower and rub yourself with the loofah. She's like trying to be on, like your boobs are covered in soap, and it's just it's not sexy though at all. It's gross, drunken ramblings, but instead of the word loofah, he struggles and calls it a falafel. He's like, I want you to rub your pussy with a falafel. And it's all on Google. It's easily accessible. The craziest voicemail ever. I don't know where I was going with that.
I could have literally gone my whole life without those details.
Clean is sexy to some people.
Yeah, mixing food in there. You can put anything with a vagina.
Yeah, so
this show just
dangerously swerving back on the topic.
But no, I wanted to say, I had a really similar experience where I went from religious right and then became atheist, and then I became liberal. And I was going to ask you because what happened to me is I went super, super liberal, and then I started coming back a little bit, not necessarily back to the right per se. I guess you could say directionally maybe, but not as like I was going to dye my hair purple. Like I was that far liberal and wear pink pussy hats and.
So you were high.
I was high.
So yeah, I never. I wouldn't say that I ever got there, but where I did get was an appreciation for people wherever they were, because I have been ultra conservative, so I understand that group. I have been, in fact, what you might call racist toward Black people. I used to be accused of that. I didn't understand why people accused me of that. But as I studied, I kind of did start to understand that. So I will acknowledge that a little bit. But I also have been very liberal. The pendulum swings, and if it's far to the right, it swings hard to the left, and that's that happened. I wouldn't say that there has necessarily been a settling in the center. So I think that socially speaking, I'm much more liberal than I ever thought I would be. I'm no hippie, but I like hippies. I appreciate them. But I don't think that they're any more in touch with reality than ultra conservatives. So I think that on either side of the extremes, you have people that are just somewhat out of touch with reality. Yeah. But within the realm of people that I do think are in touch with reality, I would definitely align myself with the social left.
This is going to blow your mind, dude, but I'm actually considering voting Jo Jorgensen. That's the chick running for libertarian right now. Yeah. And it's not because I'm libertarian. I'm really not. It's just I got nothing that I can give to the Democratic Party at all at this point. And even if, Orange Man bad, well, sorry, man, I got nothing to vote for. Last time I voted Green Party in 2016 just because I'm like, well, at least, the environment. But now I'm like, is that really important right this second? Like coronavirus, everybody stayed home for like 2 weeks and it seemed like everything got better in the environment really fast. So, I don't know. I just, the only group of people at least in the political spectrum right now that seem to be asking the right questions about civil rights issues and police brutality and government getting out of hand right now seems to be Jo Jorgensen. I don't know. I feel weird saying that I might vote libertarian.
Well, I feel weird saying that I don't know who Jo Jorgensen is.
Nobody does.
I don't actually keep up with politics as closely as a lot of people think that I should.
It's okay. Most libertarians don't know who she is. And if you ask half of them, she's not a real libertarian anyway.
Yeah, but you guys are way too strict.
To your point, I think why is she striking you is hitting the right point, asking the right questions to the American people and to the whole political spectrum as a whole is because I don't think she's starting with this group mentality of right and left and this tribal mentality like, well, if for Republican, we got to support Donald Trump, or for Democrat, we got to support Joe Biden, even if he's right in some issues and wrong with some issues. I think she's avoiding the groupthink and doing a good job at looking at the individual and asking questions like, well, if it's an individual right, it should apply to everybody. So she's starting with the individual in her political philosophy. And I think when you start with the individual and you ask questions like, do I own myself? Do I have self-ownership? Do I have property rights? Am I the master of my labor? And if you start with that conclusion where Joe is coming from, I think you can easily get to the right question for most issues. We can argue about whether the libertarian solutions are right or not, but I think it's pretty proven that you can ask very damn good questions with that mindset and that foundation.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily prepared to come and talk about politics. I don't talk about politics in public a lot. It's not a secret. I'm just not terribly political anymore. So I used to be a 24-hour news cycle kind of guy. I listened to CNN and Fox News and heck, even the financial shows, and I did that all the time. And so I kept up with politics for a long time, and I gave it up as a bad job at some point. A story not worth telling here, but I would say that the pendulum swung way the other way on that, so that I keep up with it as little as possible, because I don't find a lot of relationship to what happens, at least on the federal national political scene. I don't find that has a lot to do with the reality of my lived existence. And so I've tried to narrow down the things that don't matter and focus on the things that do matter to me at the time. And politics just again and again keeps losing that battle of what really matters to me.
I think that the big problem, though, is like, just to kind of go on with this conversation, is that there's like a real issue, I think, with us as Americans, where we see the political landscape as binary, or it's like it's either you're left or you're right. And I fundamentally believe that it's either you're a statist or you're not a statist, because in my eyes, for what I see on the stage or through our media or whatever you find your news, they say that it's Democrat or Republican, but all I see is a violent power struggle with the same people, or two sides to the same coin. I mean, we can even like just do a couple examples with the stimulus package that was passed just a couple months ago, where the largest, the most wealthy and powerful people on planet Earth were bailed out and the people were given crumbs. And they didn't seem to help the people, and they all agreed with that. But when it's other things like who gets to wield the stick, that's when they fight each other. And I think that's kind of where we're at and we're being played against, and not to put on the tinfoil hat too much.
No, for sure. I agree 100%.
Well, but it seems like you went from saying, the political system is binary, and then you just gave us another binary option. So I don't really find that compelling. I'm not, either left or right, and I'm also not either statist or not statist. So the thing I find interesting about people that are more toward the anarchy end of the spectrum is that you're living in a democratic republic. And I think that if you want to try anarchy, I'm not entirely sure there are any good places in history where we can look and see successful anarchies making it. But I would not be opposed to setting aside Utah and Idaho and just making those the anarchy states, and you can live on them like reservations, and we can completely withdraw. You can completely withdraw from society. You don't pay taxes. We don't send police to help you. You set up your own society and live. I'd love to see how that experiment works. But that's not the reality of it. And so it's easy to promote anarchy while you're living in the protection of a democratic republic.
I guess to respond to that, from twofold, there was a Rothbard talks about in his Libertarian Manifesto how ancient Ireland ran a very close to an agorist anarchy libertarian society, for up to 1,000 years, quite successful. And I encourage people to check out his work on it. So there are some examples in history where it's allowed, but you're right though. Like, it would be great to set aside Utah, do an experiment. And I often talk to people on the other side, from the anarchy to the statist side, like, hey, let's set up California or New York as a full socialist, communist experiment and see how that pans out. But I think the big difference between, I guess, the anarchy side or somewhere along the statist stick, because I'm kind of like Jake there. I see it's kind of a binary option, I guess, if you want to sum it up. There's different levels of statist, or you just don't believe in the state at all. But I think it'd be great. I mean, if people had the choice to voluntarily choose, like, my big thing is why would the state be so scared of like Utah saying we're going to do an experiment? But they wouldn't allow it. I don't believe they would allow it. I believe they'd be terrified of it. And I think at the end of the day, they know a free market solution where people don't have the stick of violent coercion over them. The state can't draw power from them, that more and more people are going to flood that area, and that the free market's going to win out because they provide a better product, better service, a better community, and a better level of price and quality than the state could provide. And I think we'll never get that experiment, David, because the government will violently put it down, because I do think it will become too attractive for people to resist.
Okay, I think that's ridiculous. I do think that the government would violently put it down. Don't get me wrong, but not for those reasons. It's like, you can have that fantasy. Oh, they're scared of our success. They are not scared of your success. There's no place in the world right now that you can point to that is run the way you want it to run. And if your ideas were so good, somebody would be doing it, and you could just go there. So I think there are good reasons why the government wants to hold the United States together. I think there are good reasons why they wanted to not allow the South to secede, or not allow Texas to secede. It's a whole other country, after all. I think there's some very good reasons for that. But to suggest that they are afraid that your experiment would be so successful everybody would want to do it, I think that we can just take a 30,000-foot view, back up a little bit and look around the world and see who kind of feels the same way you do. And apparently in mass, nobody.
There's a lot out there that do follow the way I do. It does sound ridiculous at first. It sounded ridiculous to me when I was a conservative and then a liberal. But the more I've educated myself and read libertarian philosophy, the more it just makes sense. And no offense, but I find people that are stuck in the statist thing have just the lack of the imagination about how the free market works. I mean, every day we go to Walmart, go to Myers, we buy on Amazon. We engage in free market transactions. At like 90% of our life transactions are probably free market or slightly regulated by the government that lean toward free market. And we just take it for granted. The wonders how it works. No state can make that work. The state integrates the free market under its coercive violence to kind of some sort of feasible operation where people go along with it. But the closer to free markets we get, the freer and happier people have been throughout history. And I do think that people just took a step back and just set aside the community, let an experiment run that way. I do think it'd be successful. We could say it's a 30,000-foot ridiculous viewpoint, and maybe I am. Maybe it is a fantasy I'm dreaming of, but I think an equal fantasy is that the state is going to operate successfully for a long period of time and take care of all its people. I mean, look around us. The state is violently attacking its civilians every day. I mean, it's unbelievable. Look at the history. I think in the 20th century, 100 to 200 million people killed by states. Like, it's just, to me, it's almost more of a fantasy to believe that the state and its operation is a better solution than letting people run their own lives, have self-ownership over their labor, their property, and be in control of their own destiny. I mean, does it sound like a fantasy? Maybe, but it sounds like a better fantasy than the alternative of being a part of the state operation and have to do what they want to do all the time.
Sure, and I can get behind some nice utopian fantasies, you bet. I'm a Star Trek fan, so love that stuff. We can talk sci-fi all day. But to suggest that the state is kind of holding you back from your utopia, somewhat in a backhanded way, is suggesting that the state is extremely efficient. And your view is not, because we have had the length of human history, and we have about 7 billion people, a little over 7 billion people on the planet right now. So right now, there could be some instance of what you are talking about. And, we might ask deeper questions like, well, why isn't that springing up all over the world? And why does different forms of democracies and public spring up and are successful? I would argue that it is terribly difficult for an anarchist group to organize in the first place so that they could do something as a collective group, because they're not a collective. They're a bunch of individuals. And so
I agree with you there, yeah.
Who's going to organize? Who's going to lead it? No, who's going to say, no, you be the leader? No, nobody's going to do that. They're anarchists.
First, I want to be clear to everybody, I do not think if an anarchy society popped up, it'd be utopia. It would have a shit ton of problems, a lot of problems across the board. I just think it'd be a better alternative than we have. And the second thing is like, you talked about like people like wouldn't coordinate, because there's no leader. It's anarchy, craziness. Well, I'm sure everybody, or at least maybe you guys are familiar with the SAI pencil. It's like no one man in the planet Earth has all the tools, resources, and know how to create a pencil from scratch in his backyard. Like, it's massive coordination through incentives. Like, someone's like collecting rubber down in South America, someone's in the woods, someone's collecting the lead from across the world. And they bring these pieces together through trade and free market because no one has all this knowledge and resources. And they just coordinate because it's in their incentives to do so. So I think there's a lot of arguments against that like they wouldn't know what to do because everybody's their own individual master. So how could they coordinate? Well, I would say look at the supply lines that fill our stores. Like, I mean, the coordination happens on an individual level for individual interests across the world, and it has done more to lift people out of poverty and build a successful modern society than anything the state has ever declared. And we can see that pretty clearly with the Soviet-Russian experiment, where they tried to control everything. There's hundreds of thousands of examples out there how it's just a failure across the board.
My whole thing is with the libertarian idea, it seems like you're just trading one master for the other. Like you're a sheep and two wolves just, trying to decide what we're having for dinner, where you're just saying like, okay, I don't want the state to run everything, but I'm okay with the powers that be being just the rich, right? The corporations are going to run everything, which I guess you wouldn't have incorporation, so there wouldn't be corporations, but there'd still be huge business, right? So I mean, it's just trading one master for another.
Yeah, but the choice is voluntarily. I wouldn't say your master. Do you think Jeff Bezos is your master? No, he offers you a product and you seem to like the price and you think his product is worth more than your money or your common medium exchange, so you trade it. And a ton of people do that because Jeff Bezos offers products and services of such a good quality and price that people have made him wealthy.
Jeff Bezos operates under a ton of regulation that is controlled by, wait for it, the state. So would we trust Jeff Bezos's Amazon if it was located in China? Probably not. So there are some other factors that your analysis is missing for why certain businesses, for instance, even exist in America, and they have a hard time existing in some other places in the world. You can't get a computer that is not fueled by American technology. That simply doesn't exist. Now, why can that happen here? It's not because we're a state of anarchy. It is precisely because we're a democratic republic. It seems to me also that anarchy misses another important point. Maybe you can comment on that. But I am glad to be in a democratic republic, as imperfect as it is, because I am a person who I know for a fact I couldn't make it on my own. Besides being a racial minority, I'm legally blind. I'm disabled. I'm weak. If it was just me against the world, trying to make it by my own ability to succeed, I may not make it. Under this system, I have a voice and a chance. Under anarchy, I don't see any way I survive.
So have you worked in the public sector your whole life then, or like what kind of like jobs have you had to survive?
Well, for a long time, I was a freelance writer, and it takes a little bit of skill and tenacity to make a living doing that, but I did that. I've been self-employed for a number of years, and
There was that coffee shop.
I worked in sales for a lot of years. So those are areas where I've made most of my money. But I've been a lot of things. I was a preacher. I was a musician.
I guess my point I'm getting at is you're not weak. Yeah, you might have like partial blindness or racial minority. There's other things, but it sounds like you worked mostly in the private sector, and you've been able to provide skills of value to either yourself, or people were paying you to accept your skills of freelance writing, or people saw your value at sales and they hired you.
No company would have ever given me a chance if it wasn't for some of the regulations requiring them to. And I'm not, I like to think that I'm an above average talented person, but it is not talent that got me where I am. Not talent alone. Those opportunities didn't happen because people liked me and trusted me on the spot, or that they wanted to hire me necessarily. We have tons of regulations that help people like me have a fighting chance. And under anarchy, I don't see any of that happening. It really seems like a survival of the fittest, strongest survive type of thing. Tell me why I'm wrong.
It does seem scary and everything. And I would say the main reason you're wrong is I think at least in your perspective, I can understand why you see it right, because there are regulations. I guess I'd have a question and a comment. Like, so do you truly believe without government, you'd never be able to survive on yourself or fill any skill role to earn money? And second, just because the state has put down a few decent regulations that a free market, I think, has been explained many times in libertarian philosophy, they would be able to provide. I don't want to dive into hours of depth of political philosophy, but not only that, but we're talking about a state that has let's pretend they put forth a few positive regulations, but look at the destruction and the evil they did. I mean, most of the immoral acts and mass murders and enslavements throughout human history have been state sanctioned, state run. So why should we just continue to give power to such an organization just because they put a few good regulations in?
Both of these questions are easy to answer, really, really easy. So we don't have to get into political science. We can just look at easily skimmed history. Look at the life of the week pre-regulation and look at it post-regulation. We can see what happened when there was no regulation. People like me didn't make it. If we were lucky, we were left on the street corner to sell pencils to bring it back. So there was a lot that happened before regulation that you wouldn't want to go back to. And you'd say, oh, well, things aren't perfect now. But I can tell you right now, there are more people with disabilities and weaknesses who are able to be strong and self-reliant under this system than ever there were under a system without regulation.
So I think we're going to be talking past each other on this point. So maybe I want to move on with this on final thought. You can respond to it. So I don't think we're going to change each other's minds in this particular conversation or venue.
Yeah, but hopefully we can change the minds of the people listening.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question then. So I believe people will always believe the government is useful the rest of eternity. I believe there'll be weird people like me who think it's useless and stuff like that. And I just always have this question for government believers who think all these regulations and the need for the state. Would you, I know we talked about a mass experiment wouldn't work, but would you support a government or allow someone like me or Jake to say, hey, we just don't believe in this institution. We own some land and we own our house, we own our property. We want to separate ourselves. We don't want to pay the taxes in the system. We'll take care of ourselves. We don't want to pay into Social Security. We want to just be the masters of our own labor. And we'll just live the risk by ourselves. So we're like, hey, we just want to step aside from the system, be ourselves in our own country. I just want to make my own individual plot of land, just operate my life. Like, why couldn't I do that? I guess my big question. Like, the government wouldn't allow me to, and so would you personally support that? Like, why do we have to have this system that doesn't even let people have the choice to break free of it? There's almost nowhere on planet Earth I could go to even break free of that, because most of them are run by states. There's some nomadic areas, and a lot of people joke Somalia and things like that. But if I buy a piece of property in America, work the land, have a job in the private sector, earn my own income, why can't I just say, hey, look, I want to take all the risk on myself, and I don't want to pay into the system? And quick sum up, what's so wrong with that?
Well, once again, I would encourage people to take a more historical view. Me personally, I wish you could. but on a very shallow level, at a very shallow level, I say anyone who doesn't want to be part of America, cut them loose.
And that's my big point. I'm fine if you want to have the state and people want to have the
however,
state system,
we have to get beyond the shallow level. And when you talk about the state, you talk about it as if you've divorced it from how the state became the state. The state is the people. Even bad states started with individuals trying to do collective government. Now, they may have went in the wrong direction. We've tried just about everything as a people, whether it's communism, socialism, dictatorships, monarchies, pure democracies. We've tried everything. But the state is not this amorphous thing that dropped it from outer space and took control of people. The state is people saying, we can't do this as an anarchy. It is a refutation of anarchy by the people. We have to have some kind of collective government to do some of the things that we want to do. You will never send men to the moon without some kind of collective effort beyond. And please don't talk about SpaceX, because once again, SpaceX happens under the realm of a state and regulation. We
don't you talk about
if we
Elon.
Want to have a road and build it from where I am to where you are, we have to have some kind of collective. If we're going to answer emergencies when people fall off rooftops, we've got to have some kind of collective effort, because we cannot do this as individuals. The state is our response to anarchy. It is our response to the emergencies that come up that force us to recognize that we cannot do this as individuals. And I think that if you are still locked in the fantasy that we can do it all as individuals, you just need to go back a few pages in history and recognize when we tried to do that, we couldn't do that. We could never do that. It has never lasted anywhere on the globe. And we have made the state so that we can live a better life. And I think that the state that we have in the United States, while not perfect, is pretty good, comparatively speaking. I mean, there are very few places in the world where I would want to go, but we're all making compromises. We're all trying to tweak the system to make it better for the most people that's possible. And that's kind of what we're stuck with. We're still tweaking the settings, but we have decided that the one thing that doesn't work is trying to go it as individuals.
Well, I think that you might maybe are just missing the point of anarchy just a little bit. It's not about that there won't be a collective effort whatsoever. It's more like, think of it like a puzzle piece, and each and every one of us would be an individual piece. And we're not saying that this is going to be a, good old kumbaya sitting around the fire with no suffering or nothing, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we're inherently flawed. So any kind of system that we create is flawed. I think the what we're trying to state is that the governance way that it's going with this monopoly would be far better off if it was run by a free market, which is undoubtedly more efficient at solving problems, like you said, than a collective government, which you've been describing.
And I guess I'd a quick add to that too, because I don't know how much you want to go around this circle, because sometimes it's hard without defining basic terms. It's right from the very beginning. But you mentioned a bunch of problems like funds falling from the rooftop, how would a free market respond, etc. And I just encourage listeners to just check out praxeology. Look at the history, because you bring up history a lot. Look at the history of human action, understand what incentivizes them, and just check out a few basic libertarian think tanks or starting books and stuff, and look up the questions like, well, how will the libertarian society build roads? How would they take care of the sick? How would they do this? And there are rational explanations for each and historical examples provided. I think Rothbard did the best job providing historical examples for almost every major question, and he sums it up in some of his books too. And I just encourage people, even if you think me and Jake are living in the utopia and a fancy land, it doesn't hurt to spend a few hours, just read a book, just to expand your viewpoint. I listen to more leftist and crazy right news than I do libertarian, because I try to understand where other people are coming from. I just encourage people just check out the history of it, check out the history of praxeology, human action, libertarians, and just put some of the pieces together and just get a hold of us. Just ask some questions about it. We'd love to, like we're talking right now, we'd love to talk about it. But I think at the very least, you'll start to see that the state always lags behind like the free market. Like the legislations and regulations have historically come after the free market's decided something's good or bad, and the state catches up through passing a law to make itself look good and maintain power. And you'll see it's largely a history of coercive violence that's done way more harm than good, and it's long ridden on the successes of the anarchy and, like, finger quotes, free market to maintain power. So I mean, I don't know how much longer we're going to go back and forth about that, but that's kind of my quick, I guess, summary and encouragement. I think David's got excellent points, excellent reasons to be worried about letting up the state or like putting individuals in charge and not having regulations. There's a lot of fears I have and still do as a libertarian. Sometimes I have to go like look up like, hey, how would this problem be solved in a free market? I got to really think about it and like look at the history and stuff, because it's hard to break our minds, because you're right, David. We all human history, we have accepted government, whether it's because we have the need for security and we're too scared to go on our own, or we projected anarchy, all a history. So it's hard to get out of that group mindset that there might be another alternative. And I think me and Jake with our whole tread on me thing are just trying to pitch another possible alternative. Even if we don't change you from being a statist to an anarchist, we just want you to kind of think about these questions and think about, hey, maybe there's enough truth to libertarians where we should shrink government in these regards because it's too dangerous to get past this point. If that makes sense.
I think even liberal Democrats wouldn't mind shrinking government from time to time, but you're not. As you said, you're not making a case to me. You're talking past me, which is proper on a podcast. I'm talking past you too, and I think that I am probably making more connections with real people in their real lives. So I guess my last point on this would be, even if we did give you what you asked for, and as I said, the shallower part of me wants to give you what you asked for. I know that it wouldn't work ultimately, because I know what we do for people who are ultra independent right now. When people go up and climb a mountain and it's ill-advised and the weather is bad and they want to do a free climb or whatever, and buck all of the rules, this is my life, and then they get into trouble. You know what happens? We send helicopters at great risk and we go get them. When people want to swim across the English Channel, and they're not particularly good swimmers, and that's a kind of stupid thing to do anyway. You know what happens when they get in trouble? We go get them at great cost and great expense, and we're not adding up the dollars when we send the rescuers out there. This is just the fact of it. If you in your compound, wherever you are in the reclaimed Utah, you've gotten rid of the Mormons, you're doing your thing. Something happens, you're struck by disease, wild animals, whatever. I don't care if you were a part of the United States. We would come for you in mass. We would save you. If you were burned out, we would give you shelter. We would not add up the dollars. That is what we do all day, every day, right now. And so ultimately, I don't care if you think your experiment is a good idea or not. If and when it fails, you would still have the safety of a society that cares more about you than you do about your political experimentation.
Sick burn.
Yeah, thanks for summing up. It was a good conversation, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
You guys are being very polite to wrap it up.
Well, I mean, if we had like 3 hours, I would argue that a lot. But, we don't have 3 hours.
I tell you what, come on to Skeptics and Seekers sometime,
we
don't look at the clock so much. And
yeah, that's a great idea.
We'll just let you go as long as you like.
Speaking of like helping people or what have you, and even though the U.S. didn't do a pretty good job with Corona, I think Trump flubbed the whole fucking thing. But I don't see any situation with libertarianism or anarchism that would be able to address a pandemic situation. That seems like you need the power of the state, or you'd have to have some kind of way to keep people from passing disease on to one another, I would think. That, like, you can't just have ultimate freedom in that scenario, because that's a downside of freedom, I guess, is one way to put it.
I think that some things are naturally collective. Regardless of your political system or your religious beliefs. Things like pandemic don't care about things like that. And so we need things like herd immunities, for instance, to fight viruses. Herd immunities are very important. For vaccines to work for everyone, we need to reach minimum number of people within the society so that we can develop those herd immunities. And so there are just some things that cross lines of race and religious beliefs and political identity and such. And the pandemic is one of those things. Now, that said, I'm going to just give Sam and Jacob a little comfort here by saying we flubbed it up royally. You talk about a federal government that maybe could have been the shining example of what to do in this case. Instead, we got the opposite of that. And so it's hard to think of a worse response to the pandemic than what we had. And I think that if we had had maybe more responsible leadership, this could have gone a very different way. And so what we're stuck with now is a virus that's kind of run amok, an economy where the wheels have pretty much run off. And now we're looking at secondary effects of this virus. So it's not just the people who catch it and die. Some of the secondary effects, for instance, are the people who catch it and live, but who live with a reduced quality of life, or the people who survived. My book is Surviving Corona, not dying from Corona. And the people who suffer are the people who survive. Maybe a breadwinner has passed on, and you have families that are in a state of chaos now all over as a result of this. And this particular book that I'm referring to, Surviving Corona, Believers and Unbelievers Examine Their Worldview During This Time of Crisis, is just that, where we have some very notable Christians and atheists come together and talk about this time of suffering and examine their worldview in real time to see how it's holding up. We've got luminaries such as Randall Rouser. We've got broadcast power such as Justin Brierley. We've got theologians and professors such as Robert Ord to talk about their worldviews. We have an agnostic. We have myself, Andrew, another podcaster, Matthew Taylor, Sophie Dumas, who joined us on the response book to Justin Brierley. So we've got a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different worldviews, even the Christians. None of the Christians actually agree with each other when you read the book.
Wow.
It gives a lot of information, aid, and comfort, no matter where you are on the religious spectrum, about how to understand and process what is going on during the coronavirus. And the most important part of this book is that all of the proceeds go to the International Red Cross. I just recently sent $1,000 off as a result of this book.
Really?
And so the book is $2.99. You can get it directly from Skeptics and Seekers, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Just click on the first tab where it says Surviving Corona. You can buy it there. Almost all of those proceeds go to the cause. We've got Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, Apple Pay, PayPal, however you want to do it. We also have a place there where you can just donate. So you don't even have to buy the book, or you can buy the book and donate. You donate any amount. I recommend $50 for people who are wondering how much to donate. Why 50? Because you've got it. So donate it. You can also get the book from the Kindle, from Amazon. You can just look it up, Surviving Corona. It's pretty much the first thing that comes up if you type that in there. And so this is very important. It's important not to let the 15-minute news cycle make you disinterested in this. The 15 minutes of fame thing is a very real thing. I've had a 15 minutes of fame 2 or 3 times in my life. It's very fleeting. What we do when we get the attention of the cameras on us, we have to strike while it's there as much as possible. But then something else happens in the world, and then the cameras move on. And then the cameras move on. But stop and think about it for a moment. That thing that the camera was on first hasn't gone away simply because the camera moved to some other outrage. Yeah. It's just that the support now goes away. The support goes away, but the families are still suffering. People are still dying. People are still hurting. People are still trying to put their lives back together. And so it is precisely because the cameras have moved on to something else that people of conscience need to recognize that now we have the aftermath. And that's when the donations really matter. And the Red Cross is one of the greatest organizations at distributing funds where it's needed the most. And so I appreciate, Robert, the chance to allow me on the show to make that pitch, to get people involved and excited again. A lot of people are still excited and want to know what they can do to help with the current crisis. And this is one of the things that you can do with your time and donations. Surviving Corona, www.skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com.
Sam and Jacob, thank you so much. That's Tread on Me. Everybody can find Tread on Me pretty much everywhere, isn't it? Or you said it was SoundCloud, didn't you? Is it
SoundCloud, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We even have a Minds.com account if people are really into that cryptocurrency secret social media.
Awesome. and Surviving Corona. Find that at skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Guys, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Me and all my friends were all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing else. There's no way we ever could. Now we see everything that's going wrong.
Thank you to David, Jacob, and Sam. Thank you to Dave Blair at daveblairmusic.com. Thank you to our patrons. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, we will be talking about the hierarchical structures of race, sex, and patriarchy with Atheist Experience host Phil Sessions, psychologist Dr. Daryl Ray, and conference organizer Janice Selby. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason. Cool. We feel good?
Yeah.
That was great. You know, that was...
We didn't really talk about race, but
We can do that next
I
time.
got like pages in front of me of on the race notes, but
We should
cool.
have. Well, that's what I was kind of starting it that way, but it kind of just went its own direction. But
Yeah, I don't have the
You brought
history on race.
anarchists on the show. So first of all, you had a plan, and then you brought anarchists. What did you think was going to happen?
good point. Good point. All right, I'm going to get out of here, gentlemen. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Cruising down the street in my 6'4", coughing on bitches, sneezing on hoes. Went to the park to peep the scene till homegirl said she had COVID-19. Car rolls up, who can it be? It was 3 motherfuckers from the CDC. Trump rolled down his window and he started to say, this'll all be gone by Easter Sunday. Homeschooling kids is always hard. Come talking that trash, we'll pull your car. Knowing nothing in life but to be a little shit. Don't push me, kids, 'cause I'm about to get